Um, Text topology is an apologia in the more traditional Greek sense, a defense of my methodology. Um, there's a quick, if you give the appendices to the Lord of the Rings a quick perusal, they'll reveal that the Old and Middle and Modern English, in which the novel presents the languages of the Rohirrim and the Hobbits, are meant to be understood as translations of other languages of Tolkien's own creating, um, namely Rohirric and Westron. It, of course, shouldn't be surprising that our protagonists' mother tongues, as well as the languages most closely related to them, should be anything other than outworkings of the elaborate family of languages, complete with their own thorough philological histories, that are the lifeblood of Tolkien's subcreation. But the fact of this claim that everything that's in English in the novel is translated from something else compels me to offer the brief apologia for presenting a talk to you today that takes very seriously the literary roles of the Germanic languages presented as translations and the imaginative fabric of Middle Earth as presented in these novels. Let me present the translation claim in slightly more detail. The appendices to The Lord of the Rings state that in the actual language that the hobbits speak, called Westron, Frodo, Baggins, and Samwise's real names are Maura Lapingi and Banazir. Theoden's name in Rohirric is given as Turak. The statement goes that all of the English, and by extension related languages that appear in the novel, such as Old Norse and once or twice Gothic, names and words are presented as calques of Westron, Rohirric, other languages of various peoples of the north, who are all speakers of languages derived from a common tongue, derived from a kind of Numenorian Koine. Tolkien uses these Germanic substitutes to help the presumably English-speaking reader to better feel the philological and historical relationships between these different people groups. This effort rests upon a belief that the average speaker of modern English will indeed feel a sense of linguistic kinship and the sound of related languages, known or unknown, which is itself a point that's probably a bit contestable. Um, and from this, they'll be able to sympathize with our Hobbit protagonists and their experience as part of the world of related languages. Tolkien's writing helps us to feel this kinship, firstly, by presenting very English place names all about the Shire and the surrounding area, such as Withywindle, which is a river surrounded by willow trees, and Buckland, as well as in Rohan, such as the Mark and the Westfold. The linguistic connections between the peoples of these two regions is made all the more apparent when Meriadoc Brandybuck and Theoden, the king of Rohan, discuss the etymology of the word hobbit, derived from the Old English word holdbitla, or hole builder. And they discover that the modern English spoken by the hobbits is in fact a greatly changed form of the Mercian Old English spoken by Theoden's people. Because modern and Old English are given instead of Westron and Rohirric, the English-speaking reader is made to feel the Hobbit's linguistic and cultural relationship to the Erlingas, the Rohirrim. Tolkien further weaves Germanic languages carefully into the linguistic fabric of Middle-earth by creating realistic linguistic relationships not only between them, but also between them and his invented languages that surround them. See the English folk etymology of the river Branduin, which flows about the Shire, named by the hobbits Brandywine, for an especially entertaining example. Indeed, relationships between the Elvish tongues are undoubtedly germane to Arda and the English that we are meant to understand as a translation and occur in several places. Tolkien borrows the name of the star Eärendil, of course, from an Old English poem about a star of more or less the same name. Let's see. Here we are. Ela Eärendil engla bjartnast, over middanjörn molnum sended, on solfasta sunnan leama, Tortavertunglas to tida Jehuane of Sulvan the Sinle in Lichtes. Hail, Erendil, brightest of angels, above Middle Earth, sent unto men, and true light of the sun, bright above all stars, thou thyself brighten all times or all seasons. Tolkien believed this word to be too beautiful to be English, so here the word to be reimagined is a loan word borrowed into English or earlier Germanic, sometime in the midst of a distant past, possibly in our own world. In similar vein, Eomer's misconceptions about the elven lady Galadriel, which is a name built off of, I'm told from the appendices, I do not know Sindarin at all, built off of the root ri for crown and galath for light, seems not coincidentally to reflect the actual meaning, replete with its negative connotations, of the similar sounding Germanic root galdra, which means sorcery or witchcraft. Think of this is a picture of the Galdrasadnir, the witchcraft museum in Holmavik, Iceland, and that's a picture of the rune wheel that is their logo. Um, here are Eomer's words after learning that Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli have just been in Lothlorien in the presence of Galadriel. He says, "Then there is a lady of the Golden Wood, as old tales tell. Few escape their nets, they say. These are strange days. But if you have her favor, then you also are net weavers and sorcerers, maybe." So, well, that's end quote, by the way. So you can imagine how the second A and Galadriel might gradually disappear if its accentuation is placed on the first syllable, as is done more or less routinely and across the Germanic languages, with verbal prefixes aside. The second A would be syncopated into the word and go from Galadriel to Galdra. So here, the history of the words borrowing from Sindarin into ostensibly Old English within the world of the Lord of the Rings tells a story, and a tragic one at that, one in which the subcreative art and power of the Lady of the Wood lose their connotations of beauty and wonder as she slowly passes from history to myth, becoming feared and mistrusted. This adds a powerful mythic layer to our understanding of the Germanic languages, even as they operate in our own world. For it creates the feeling this could well have happened in some half-remembered past of our own past. Oh, half-remembered part of our own past, sorry. The depth of philological history that he has given to English in the novel, evocative of the convoluted history of real English words and place names, should not be brushed aside for being presented as a translation. The role of the Germanic words in Lord of the Rings is integral to the fabric of Tolkien's novel and to our relationship with the world that it presents it to us. So the second part of my apologia, for my methodology, is that it rests on Tolkien's view of meaning in history, which I got from a quote from one of his letters, and the meaning that languages can take within that view of history. The above example of Galadriel's name is illustrative, but it occurs within his subcreation, and it bears pointing out that because a good subcreation should be reflective of the primary creation that he observes, the Tolkien saw similar operating principles at work in history, though this was normally something he kept carefully separate from his academic work. There's a letter to his son Christopher, also a philologist and a budding one at that time, in which the older Tolkien applauds his son for discussing the Gothic etymologizing of the Hunnic name Attila. Attila was a scourge to many Germanic peoples, but he also attracted many other Germanic peoples, especially amongst the different Gothic-speaking peoples, as followers. Though the Huns' origins are contested, Attila himself was almost certainly not Gothic or any other kind of Germanic. And though it's not impossible that his name was preserved, that this particular name preserved from posterity was a Germanic nickname, it's not generally accepted now. Rather, it seems that Attila's name had an entirely different etymology in Hunnic, but a sound that lined up effectively with the Gothic lexemes atta, which means father, and illa, which is a diminutive suffix, therefore meaning something along the lines of daddy. This serendipitously reflected the role that he took on for many of his Gothic followers, to whom he provided plunder and victory in a fatherly fashion. This is one of Christopher Tolkien's own theories, and one that the older Tolkien really admired, for reasons that he explained as being his way of enjoying philology and history. So that is an allegory, which is the reason I bring it up. I know that many of you who are more better and Tolkien enthusiasts than I am are very familiar with his famed dislike of allegory. It is a very different mode in that it's him finding a kind of philological delight in the coincidences of history. So in a more, I think, in a more straightforwardly allegorical text, like Langland's Piers Plowman or Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, or Tolkien's own Leaf by Niggle. There, that one. The story's constituent characters, settings, and actions share more of a one-to-one correspondence with philosophical concepts or actual historical figures or events, which is not the kind of interpretation I propose here, but should my analysis seem as though it drifts into this territory, I offer this quote of Tolkien's as a partial defense, which is, I dislike allegory, the conscious and intentional allegory, yet any attempts to explain the purport of myth or fairy tale must use allegorical language. And of course, the more life a story has, the more readily will it be susceptible of allegorical interpretations. So the aim of this paper is to give some observations of how wisdom is presented primarily in The Lord of the Rings, with a few references to The Hobbit, and my apologies for where it sounds somewhat allegorical. We'll start with Old Norse. This is a quote from the Old Norse poem Hávamál, in which Odin, the chief of the Aesir, that is, the gods of Germanic heathenism, who is ever concerned with accruing wisdom, warns his audience of the pains of becoming wise. Here are 4 stanzas translated by Oxford's very own Caroline Larrington. Of small sands and small seas, small are the minds of men, for all men aren't equally wise. Men everywhere are half wise, half not. Half wise a man ought to be, never too wise, for he lives the best sort of life, the man who knows a fair amount. Half wise a man ought to be, never too wise, for a wise man's heart is seldom cheerful, if he who owns it is too wise. Half wise a man ought to be, never too wise. No one may know his fate beforehand if he wants a carefree spirit. It's far better to be what Odin describes as half wise than it is to be fully wise, having enough wisdom to deal with life's difficulties, but not enough to bring sorrow or pain, for full wisdom comes with this agony. It is the half-wise man, he says, who lives happily unto old age. We're going to look at both wisdom and half-wisdom very shortly. There are many Old Norse words for wise. That was originally the topic of my thesis, and that fell by the wayside. The one used in this poem is snotr, which does not, as far as I can recall, appear in Lord of the Rings, either in Old Norse or in its Old English cognate form, but its connotations of pain and experience are shared by a different Old English word, which is froda, which you already recognize. It's cognate with the Old Norse word frodi, which we'll return to shortly, which makes this a fitting name for J.R.R. Tolkien's ring-bearer. At the end of his journey, Frodo Baggins is left with 3 wounds that cannot be healed. A stab wound, which he received from the Witch King of Angmar at Weathertop, a sting from the spider Shelob, and a missing ring finger. The struggles of the journey that he has endured leave him spiritually wearied, or seldom cheerful, as Odin/Larrington might say. Unable ever to feel at home again, and the very home he set out to save, his story ends with his departure from Middle-earth to seek healing in the undying lands of the Elves, west across the sea. The cognate word in Old Norse, frode, has 2 common sets of connotations, and the first is more or less the same as Old English, which is wise. I'm not as sure that it shares the connotations of pain and age that Old English does. I've seen that discussed. Well, we can return to that in the question and answer. As it relates to wisdom, it's the name of a legendary Danish king named Frode, who is said to have ruled Scandinavia at the same time that Christ was walking the earth, and who brought an end to internecine feuding in Scandinavia, and had giants who ground peace and gold from an enchanted millstone. But Frode's other connotations in Old Norse, more common at least in the text that I'm familiar with is of learning. It's used as an epithet for individuals in Old Norse literature who are regarded for their knowledge, like Ari Frode, the author of Íslendingabók, which is there on the left. And that's his tombstone on the right. And Ari is famous for having memorized an enormous amount of oral tradition, which he then put down into writing an Íslendingabók for posterity. Tolkien incorporates these Old Norse connotations learning into Frodo's character alongside all the Old English connotations that I've mentioned. Early in the novel, the elf lord Gildor Inglorian praises Frodo for his knowledge of the Elvish language, Sindarin, and upon his arrival at Rivendell, the dwarf Glowin praises him for knowing the correct formal greetings for his people. So Bilbo has been a good tutor to Frodo. He's not helped Frodo accrue knowledge for knowledge's sake, but rather for the greater good of interacting with and serving a variety of other peoples. Much as Odin's teaching in Hávamál might lead us to predict, the quest to destroy the One Ring is less damaging to Frodo than it is to his half-wise servant, Samwise, whose name, as you've already guessed, is indeed Old English for half-wise. Though its etymological relative in modern English may be half-wit, I'm not trying to attribute any dimness to the so-named hobbit. Throughout The Lord of the Rings, Samwise demonstrates an impressive knowledge of herblore, culinary skill, and even a taste for poetry, some of which of his own composition. And he recites one of the elephant, which is why I picked this picture. It's not a picture of wisdom. Um, as the journey wears on, Sam's love for his master, the hardships for his journey, and even a brief stint bearing the ring himself do bring about a growth in wisdom of the Frodo-like variety for him, blurring the lines between these characters as simply representations of different kind of wisdom, and hopefully alleviating any fear you might have that I'm bestowing too allegorical interpretation on this. But unlike his wisdom-afflicted master, the journey ends for him with him settling down in the Shire to start a family and to take on a prominent role in rebuilding his ruined homeland. His kinds of knowledge are those that enhance communal life. He illustrates what Odin describes as half-wise. So by now you will have already guessed the third figure I'm going to mention, whose name has connotations of wisdom and of knowledge. It will take a little bit more explanation. There's a word common in the early Germanic languages. It's smilga in Old Norse, and it's smeagan in Old English, which means most literally to creep or to sneak, to squeeze through, to pierce. It appears in The Hobbit in the Old Norse past participle, in the name of the dragon, Smaug or Smaug, depending on which pronunciation system you go with. But in Old English, the word also took on the separate meaning of inquiring into, meditating, philosophizing, or, as an old tutor of mine put it, poking one's nose into. So the Old English word smeagan is a fitting source for the name Smeagol, who transforms into Gollum as he follows his interest in the roots of things, perhaps not unlike Tolkien's own interests in the roots of words, by sneaking. Again, the word's other meaning. Sneaking deeper and deeper into the underground tunnels of the Misty Mountains to find their roots, until, importantly, he lost sight of the sun, here a fitting symbol of light and so, by extension, clear sight, in exchange of the higher sort of knowledge for a voracious but visionless lust for knowledge. Indeed, he even begins his tragic transformation by killing his cousin Déagol, whose name derives from the Old English word Dagon, to conceal, to keep secret. That's a picture of Cain and Abel, to draw out the sort of Grendel-like connections to Gollum, which we won't actually discuss, but I need a picture. Have a moment. Smeagol's sneakiness, then, his abandonment of the light, his murder of that which is secret, mark him out as representative of a very different kind of knowledge than those embodied by Frodo and Samwise. Where Frodo's and Sam's knowledge and wisdom serves the good of others, Smeagol's harms others and isolates him from his community. But it is telling, I think, that Frodo, seeking to see the good in Smeagol, calls him by his real name, rather than Gollum, acknowledging his knowledge and his wisdom, however corrupted, rather than calling him Gollum, as Sam normally does. This is reflective of Frodo's own perceptiveness, part and parcel to the wisdom his name represents, the ability of true wisdom to see the good, or at least the worth, in other kinds of wisdom and knowledge, and to work to put them to use for good ends, as we shall see later. Of course, the reader, or perhaps even Tolkien himself, are not aware of Gollum's real name yet when Bilbo first encounters him under the Misty Mountains in The Hobbit. But the manner in which Bilbo first obtains the ring from Smeagol is inspired by Odinic motifs, and therefore motifs that reflect the accrual of knowledge and wisdom. Namely, knowledge competitions and riddle matches that Odin uses to test the minds of his opponents and to gain wisdom himself, as he does with the Jotun, Vafthrûdnir, and the Gothic king Heidrek, both renowned for their wisdom and knowledge, and the Eddic poem Vafthrûdnismál and in Hervarar saga of Heidrek, respectively. Smeagol's name may not yet have. Oh, sorry, and that is a picture from Vafthrudnir. There's Vafthrudnir on the right, and Odin on the left, having their riddle competition. There's Frigg in the middle, and there on the left is one of the only illustrations I could find in the Khervara saga. It is not a picture of the riddle match, but yeah, there you are. Smeagol's name may not have been revealed yet in The Hobbit, but when he encounters Bilbo, his character is. He enjoys riddles, and he is good at them. It's telling, too, that they reveal his humanity. But in Ovinic fashion, Bilbo wins his riddling match unfairly. When he takes his final turn to ask a question, Ovin asks one to Vafthrudnir, well, and also to Haedric, same question, to which only he could possibly know the answer, and that is, what did Odin say to Baldur, that's his son, as he laid him to rest on his funeral pyre? Compare, what have I got in my pocket? Smeagol's name is unknown, but the link between Gollum and the Smeag root is sort of created in The Hobbit through its relationship to the same word in Old Norse, for his conversation with Bilbo is a narrative parallel to Smaug's. Much as Gandalf describes Smeagol as creeping to the roots of the mountains in The Lord of the Rings, Smaug is described as having lived at the mountain's root, again an apt metaphor for the further pursuit of knowledge. What is more, here's a quote from The Hobbit. No dragon can resist the fascination of riddling talk and wasting time trying to understand it. This fascination with riddling talk for its own sake and of wasting time puts Smaug's lust for knowledge into the same dark category as Gollum's. Bilbo also tricks Smaug with a self-referential riddle, or at least question, identifying himself as, among other things, the Barrel Rider, something only he would know, as he did it while he was invisible. In outwitting these sneaks, Bilbo is revealed to be quite the sneak himself. It may on some level be knowledge or wisdom that Bilbo wins, as Odin does, but certainly besting figures who display this sneaky knowledge reveal something of Bilbo's own cunning. This knowledge comes with a warning, though. Smeagol lives deep under a mountain, and broods over a gold ring. Smaug lives deep under a mountain, on top of a pile of gold treasure, his belly encrusted with fragments of gold. Bilbo returns home, under the hill, to Bag End. Our final image of him is with a new golden ring, and with new golden buttons on his waistcoat. Indeed, he first signals the parallel himself when he describes himself to Smaug as coming from under the hill. The parallel between Bilbo's encounters with Gollum and Smaug, underscored by the parallel that he himself grows into, establishes a connection between Smeagol and with a particular kind of sneaking knowledge his name represents well before his name is revealed to us, and establishes that if you aren't careful in associating with that kind of knowledge, or rather if you don't approach that kind of knowledge with true wisdom, then it can change you to make it more like itself. So a quick digression just so we do wrap up where Bilbo goes with this. This is a picture of Geirröðr holding Odin, roasting Odin between two fires from the Eddic poem Grímnismál. Bilbo's arguable final encounter with the ring and temptation for it is before the fireplace in the Fellowship of the Ring when Gandalf is trying to convince him to give it up. Gandalf is our most visually Odinic figure. He wears a blue hat, a gray cloak. He wanders about with a staff just like Odin does. And he is closely associated with fire, whether through his fireworks, his flaming pine cones in The Hobbit, or his battle with the Balrog and the Fellowship of the Ring. And it's before a fire that Bilbo is really put to the test, in which Gandalf gets the riddle right, even though Bilbo doesn't ask it. Bilbo, the ring is still in your pocket. So, to return to Smeagol, though. Frodo's very deliberate when he meets him, in his efforts not to let Smeagol get the best of him. Rather, he sets out to tame him, and these efforts bring about a positive change in him. Frodo's and Smeagol's relationship is neatly expressed by this observation of Sam's. Here's a quote. For a moment it appeared that his master, Frodo, had grown and Gollum had shrunk, a tall, stern shadow, a mighty lord, who hid his brightness in a gray cloud, and at his feet a little whining dog. Yet the two were in some way akin and not alien. They could read each other's minds. End quote. So true wisdom must train the sneaking, philosophizing sort of wisdom in order for their quest to succeed. So the following digression is a little unsound, but bear with me. It rests on a comparison of Lord of the Rings to two works of literature composed in languages that Tolkien outspokenly disliked. The first is Irish and the second is Italian. The first The first is the 12th century Middle Irish text, the Aglav na Sheanóra. It's one of the primary texts of the Fenian cycle, that is, the story of Finn MacColl and his band of warriors called the Fian. It's a collection of tales about the Fian and about Finn, which are situated within a frame story in which they are narrated by two aged members of the Fian band, Coillte MacRonan and Oisin MacFian. Oisin in modern Irish. They're two of the last survivors of the Fian, and they are fantastically aged. They narrate these stories to St. Patrick as they lead him on a tour about Ireland. Both Coillte and Oisin are revealed to be not only ancient, that is, Sheanóra, one of the titles of the work, but also miraculously kept alive for centuries in order to impart their knowledge of the past to Patrick. Now in the safekeeping of Ireland's patron saint, Ireland's heroic pre-Christian past is open to exegesis as part of Ireland's now Christianized history, as is the land that the stories are tied to. Tales are baptized, if you like, integrated into Ireland's new Christian culture, and finally the last of the warriors of the Fian are able to die in peace at the dawn of Ireland's Christian era. What's chiefly interesting to me here is the pattern this presents. Two fantastically old figures from the pre-Christian past lead a Christian on a journey while imparting pre-Christian knowledge and wisdom to him so that he can redeem it and incorporate it into the new culture on the cusp of a new era. The best known use of this pattern that I'm aware of must certainly be by the 13th, 14th century Italian poet Dante Alighieri in his Divine Comedy, in which the pagan poet Virgil guides Dante through hell and purgatory, teaching him about what they see. Crucially, Virgil is unable to accompany Dante on the final stretch of his journey through the higher levels of purgatory as they near paradise, which is a more melancholic end for him than that faced by the Fian warriors, but one still indicative of the old wisdom and the old arts passing on their knowledge, or perhaps, if you're an Augustine fan, their Egyptian gold, before parting from their students. And a dark twist on this pattern. Smeagol is a figure who bestows knowledge of the secret paths into Mordor that he himself has fittingly gained through sneaking. Indeed, he helps Frodo and Sam to sneak along these paths themselves, sometimes at night as he would prefer. Sometimes Frodo makes him walk in the light of the sun, though. Like Patrick and Dante, Frodo repurposes the old knowledge, even bringing it into the light. Like Coillte, Oisin, and Virgil, Smeagol is astoundingly old. His age is twisted and unnatural, the result of the ring's corruption and his abandonment of Frodo, unlike the parting of Virgil, Coillte, or Oisin, is deeply malicious, and done not in the light of the rising sun, as when Coillte and Oisin meet Patrick or Virgil leaves Dante, but in the shadowy depths of Shelob's lair deep under a mountain, once again. Here the Smeag root has returned underground to darkness, and its trickery has triumphed over wisdom, at least for now. But light's not lacking in this episode. Dante enthusiasts will remember, of course, that when Virgil deprives Dante of himself, the arriving light coincides with the arrival of Beatrice, who takes over as Dante's tour guide. Oh, there she is. And guides Dante to the beatific vision in Purgatorio Canto 30. I'll lead to others of finer points of Beatrice's literary and theological significance, but I think it is significant that Dante's affection for her is often understood as an expression of courtly love, one that points eventually toward Mary. Tolkien, in a letter to his son Michael, disparages the concept of courtly love as an artificial game, a way of enjoying love for its own sake without reference to, and indeed contrary to, matrimony. Another quote from the same letter: "Its center was not God, but imaginary deities, love and the lady. It still tends to make the lady a kind of guiding star." This is not wholly true, and it is not perfectly theocentric. And that's the end of that quote. In the same letter, though, Tolkien speaks of the positive change that courtly love brought to the world, that, quote, "when harmonized with a religion, it produces much of that beautiful devotion to Our Lady," which is to say Mary. Certainly Mary's title as Mare Stella, Star of the Sea, and her traditional association with the morning star, which she took over after the fall of Lucifer, well, long after, but formerly he held it, I should say, resonate in a way with Tolkien's analysis of the courtly lady as guiding star, but I want to put those aside and instead draw attention to Galadriel as giver of light from a guiding star, perhaps more as Mary gave the light of the world that shone out in the darkness. How fitting, in light of his critique of courtly love, that Tolkien carefully separates the image of the guiding star from that of the lady. Here's another quote. This one from The Lord of the Rings. It seemed to him, Frodo, that he saw a light in his mind, almost unbearably bright at first, as the sun ray to the eye of one long hidden in the windowless pit. Then the light became color, green, gold, silver, and white. Far off, as in a little picture drawn by elven fingers, he saw the Lady Galadriel standing on grass in Lothlorien, and gifts were in her hands. Slowly his hand went to his bosom, and slowly he held aloft the phial of Galadriel. For a moment it glimmered, faint as a rising star, struggling in heavy earthward mists. And then, as its power waxed and hope grew in Frodo's mind, it began to burn and kindled to a silver flame, a minute heart of dazzling light, as though Eärendil himself had come down from the high sunset paths with the last Silmaril upon his brow. End quote. Rather than resort to trickery, as Bilbo, Gollum, or Smaug might have done, Frodo's wisdom is one that seeks hope and light given to him by Lady Galadriel, that is, as Samwise observes, beyond the reach of shadow, outside of the cave. A similar sense of hope in Sam is crucial to the mission's success, but it develops somewhat differently than in Frodo, and in a way that shows Sam growing from a markedly Samwise form of wisdom to a more Frodo-like form of wisdom. Frodo's wisdom makes him aware early on that his quest is unlikely to succeed, and that he is unlikely to return. But until the party is well into Mordor and has seen its horrors, Sam maintains that they will return to the Shire. Frodo places some hope. It's not a hobbit hole, it's a barrow. But it looks very similar, and it's called Badshot, which is the name of the street that Sam lives on. So, more on that possibly in the Q&A. Sam maintains that they will return to the Shire. Frodo places some hope and a conviction that what he's doing is right, whether he lives or not. Sam's hope is initially of the more naive variety, the kind we speak of day to day, when we think that things will work out. I don't think this is dimness, and it seems to be the same half-wisdom that prevents Sam from seeing Gollum's humanity, as Frodo does, which is a mistake that's anything but dumb. Sam wavers between calling Gollum Smeagol and Gollum. Here's a quote from him. Well, Gollum, or whatever it is that we're meant to call you. And on several occasions, he shows an unwitting etymological insightfulness in calling him Sneaker. He's rightly acknowledging different sides of Gollum's character, though perhaps not in the right ratios. I'll leave that up to you. And it's not foolishness that Sam believes beyond all reason that Frodo, after being stunned by Shelob, must still be alive, for without Sam's hope and his decision to return to his master's body, the quest would have failed. Though not wise in the same sense that Frodo is, Sam too sees hope in the same star. Here's a quote. There peeping among the cloud wrack above a dark tor, high above in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft clear and cold, the thought pierced him, that in the end the shadow is only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. It's Samwise, whose wisdom does not entail the same kind of suffering that Frodo's does, and does not deceive as Smeagol's does, and who finds hope beyond himself in a higher light. Samwise the gardener, rather than the shining Galadriel of Beatrice, who supports Frodo on the final stretch through Gorgoroth. So Gorgoroth, incidentally, is one simple liquid sound change, one simple liquid consonant change, away from Golgoloth, the Hebrew form of the Aramaic word Golgotha. This is a presumed site of Golgotha. Golgotha, Latinized, is Calvaria or Calvary, the name of the hill that Christ ascends in the final hours before his crucifixion and on which he is killed. Gorgoroth is the central region of Mordor in which Frodo, Samwise, and Smeagol likewise ascend Mount Doom. This ascent marks a turning point for Sam in his growth in a form of Frodo like wisdom, for he, like Bilbo and Frodo before him, is unable to kill Gollum, for he now has also borne the ring. And now he dimly guessed the agony of Gollum's shriveled mind and body, enslaved to that ring, unable to find peace or relief ever in life again. Sam had no words to express what he felt. So it's an act of Christ-like wisdom and mercy, yet also of apparent folly, to let an evil character go free, and it has Christ-like repercussions, for Smeagol does not reciprocate Samwise's mercy, striking him in the head so that all goes black. Christ's mercy, similarly, got him wrongly convicted in a sham trial and unjustly murdered, while Barabbas, an actual criminal, went free. This decision prevents Sam helping his master in yet another dark tunnel under a mountainside, the one that leads straight to the fires of Mount Doom. Here, deep under another mountain, Frodo, like Smeagol, Smaug, and Bilbo before him, becomes ensnared by the allure of a piece of gold and takes the ring for himself. In Gorgoroth, just as on Golgotha, wisdom fails and evil triumphs, at least for a while. Then, in a curious twist on the motif from The Hobbit, the sneaking sword of wisdom triumphs. Smeagol reclaims the ring. Yet it's when Smeagan defeats Frodo, when cunning defeats wisdom, that evil is destroyed. This paradox is central to the stories both of Christ's crucifixion and to the destruction of the ring, and, crucially, both take place on the same day. Medieval scholars believe that the original date of Good Friday was March the 25th, and that is the day in Lord of the Rings on which the ring is destroyed. But for him, Sam, this is a quote, I could not have destroyed the ring. The quest would have been in vain even at the bitter end. So let us forgive him, for the quest is achieved and now all is over. Compare, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, and Tetelestai, it is finished. So I don't suggest that Frodo is an allegory for Jesus in any way, not least because Frodo fails and Jesus doesn't. But the suffering that Frodo undergoes as being part of Frodo, to reiterate one more time, wisdom through pain, experience, maybe age. And so it's not unlike, if not Christ necessarily, certainly the Christian taking up his cross to grow more like Christ, as he is called to share in Christ's suffering. It's telling that after the ring is destroyed and Frodo and the other hobbits return to the Shire to scour it of Saruman's influence, that Frodo eschews the use of arms, encourages his comrades to kill as few of Saruman's ruffians as possible, and very deliberately spares Saruman's life, and in one last image of the same, drawing wisdom out from under a hillside, Searu, the first component in Saruman's name, is another word for wisdom, one that has more of the associations of cunning, so a wise man or a cunning man. Frodo draws him out of the hill and into the light, where he spares his life. By providence, he is killed shortly. But you do see the final image is much the same as what we saw before. It's telling, too, that after enduring this quest, that Frodo is unable to remain in the world, even though he set out to save it. So, in terms of discussing the passing of wisdom and the passing of even language, this quote from 1 Corinthians seems relevant. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. So that's all. Thank you.